VFX is something that's really popular now in modern day films. However, it's actually been around for over 30 years. VFX is a medium better explained with moving images, so over the course of this documentary we'll be looking at the history of VFX and comic books. We'll be looking at how VFX has impacted the storytelling of films, and seeing whether it's been a good thing or a bad thing for the film industry. Visual effects today are magnificent and take us to worlds beyond our imaginations. However, this technology has been around for over 100 years. Back in the early 1900s, VFX was already being used, but in a much more simpler way than we use it today. Now we can create whole planets and different worlds, whereas years ago with animated films this wasn't the case. Animated films were created by comic illustrators, and these films would feature popular characters from their comics at that time. They would use something called the single frame method. This is where a single image would be projected at a high volume of frames per second, also known as FPS. Each individual movement and frame had to be drawn one by one. We still use FPS today when using software such as After Effects or Nuke. The earliest surviving animated short is Humorous Phases of Funny Faces from 1906 by James Stewart Blackton. However, it is considered that Winston McCoy's Gertie the Dinosaur from 1914 is the first successful cartoon. Animation techniques continue to develop in shorts, leading to the first full-length animated film, Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. 3D animation, however, such as CGI, was not used until Richard Heffron's Future World, a sequel to the film Westworld. The effects were created by a visual effects company called III, who ended up winning an award from the Scientific and Engineering Academy in 1994. In Future World, the CGI was really simple. It was used to create just a hand and a face that was being displayed on a computer monitor. Now, in modern films such as Avengers Age of Ultron, CGI has advanced so far that you can replicate an army of robots and reverse engineer an android. In this film, Paul Bettany portrayed a character called the Vision.
Well, I was born yesterday.
The actor was on set in costume, but in post-production was completely removed, and they took features from the shoot and these were added with VFX. Also in this film, Robert Downey Jr.'s character Iron Man takes on Mark Ruffalo's Hulk. This scene solely relied on VFX to create two physically large-scale characters come to life in a much more believable way.
Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep.
Visual effects are continuing to push the boundaries of visuals and the way we tell our stories. Gareth Edwards' 2016 film, Rogue One, stood out for showing the potential of the future of VFX. In the original trilogy of Star Wars, an Imperial officer named Tarkin was portrayed by Peter Cushing, who had died in 1994. In the 2016 film, the character still features, however he is played by Guy Henry. With the advancements in VFX technology, Cushing was still featured, with Henry appearing on set performing motion capture. And then later on, archive footage was used to digitally transfer Cushing's face onto Henry's. Many praised the ability to do this, however there was some ethical problems criticised, as the studio decided to bring back the late actor. And of course we had seen this previously in other films such as Fast and Furious 7 for the late Paul Walker. Initially, audiences believed that Tarkin's involvement in the film would be a mere reflection in the window. That was until he turned around to show a complete CGI model of his face. For many viewers this was amazing, however it could be disorientating to see a dead actor brought back to life on screen in such an accurate visual. This now brings a new worry for people about how they're going to be represented after death. Actors will now need to take precautions to ensure they are not represented in a way they would disagree with, as they will no longer be around. The late Robin Williams has done this already, by placing his likeness into a trust who have control of it until 2039. I personally believe while there are still many ethical problems to tackle, this technology is a good thing. It allows us to tell stories with characters in a huge way. Tarkin's role in Rogue One was as big as his role when Cushing was alive in the other films. This industry just needs to ensure they respect the late actors and portray them in a meaningful and respectful way.
You can leave without saying goodbye.
Comic books have been around for over a century, but still are constantly coming out, and continue to push the boundaries by visiting complex worlds and telling amazing stories. Comic books go as far as back as 1842, with the comic book The Adventures of Obadiah Oldbuck. However, comic book movies today are based on more recent comic books from the 1930s onwards. In April 1960, Richard A. Lupoff labelled the 1930s to the 1950s as the Golden Age. This started with the introduction of Superman in 1938. This also saw the first entries of Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, and Captain Marvel. Just after the Golden Age came the Silver Age of comic books. Since the 1960s, the comic book industry has been dominated by superhero comics published by Marvel Comics, which used to be named Timely Comics, and DC Comics, which used to be named National Periodical Publication. During the Silver Age, shortly after World War II, the comic book industry began to decline. One reason for this was the competition it received from television. A decade later, the Bronze Age occurred. During this age, comic books shifted their focus again and decided to focus on the form itself to make the comic book art itself improve by experimenting with more colour and page arrangement. It was during this age Marvel and DC began to license out their characters to film and TV for revenue. This eventually led on to the cinematic universes we have today, such as the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Extended Universe. With comic book art visuals improving, this led for the need to have better VFX in modern films. Comic books decided to improve their visuals to become more realistic and tell better stories. This same thing has happened in film. VFX has needed to improve so the visuals in the film can improve. Being able to go to outer space and alien worlds has allowed more stories to be told than ever before. Now this is where stuff gets really interesting as we look into how things have adapted from comics to film.
Yeah, no, I'm good, Arrow guy, let's go!
How it's reflecting the current world, and how the type of genre can affect something. In Keith Brooker's book, Encyclopedia of Comic Books and Graphic Novels, he makes an interesting point. The history of comic books is vast and complex. Some practical, but often difficult decisions have had to be made regarding the content. Comic books are reflecting the current world and adapting their stories for this. With comic book movies becoming more popular, Iron Man has adapted stories to reflect the modern world. In the 2013 film Iron Man 3, we see the story of Tony Stark battling a terrorist, a type of villain he has previously encountered in the first Iron Man film. Sadly, a lot of soldiers now encounter PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is explored in the film. The last time we saw Tony Stark before this film was in the Battle of New York, in a near-death experience.
He's not slowing down.
This is compiled on top of his experience being kidnapped by terrorists in the first film, and now this new threat. It becomes something heavily portrayed in the film and allows certain audience members to relate to the character.
Tony!
Genre also plays a huge part into a way a film is perceived. For example, comedies are not taken as serious as a drama piece. This would be looking at the film's structure and narrative. However, genre doesn't just affect this. It also affects the production side and in particular VFX. In John Throw's genre theory book, he believes genres are the framework. Genres are the frames that establish appropriate ways of reading, or viewing, or listening to texts. They are made up of material and former features, a thematic structure, a situation of address which mobilises a set of rhetorical purposes, and a more general structure of implication. He too believes that genres affect the way we react to a piece. Comedies provoke laughter, dramas can cause sadness, and comic book or action movies can let out emotions of joy and wonder. We also tend to experience escapism from pretty much any film we watch. Escapism is the inclination to distract ourselves from everyday life, unpleasant times, and take a break from life and forget about our worries for the next few hours. In this documentary, comic books has been our focus point. This genre tends to allow the audience to escape the most. The audience is taken to worlds they would never see. There are endless possibilities. Whether that be a world with gods, or a man who goes on a rampage as a green superhuman. The one thing these things have in common are the fact that they heavily rely on VFX. Joss Whedon's 2012 film The Avengers is a prime example. It heavily relied on VFX. Marvel makes a huge amount of money from these films, which all rely on VFX. This is proven with 4 of its movies earning over $1 billion at the box office. There is a particular interesting theory that is very important when adapting comic books into movies, and that is the adaptation theory. Many believe that when adapting a text, many problems come along with it. There will always be criticism about how elements can be lost from the original medium. While VFX has allowed us to go to places never seen before,
All yours.
there are certain people in the industry that believe it hasn't necessarily improved films. In an interview I conducted with Claudia Cermak, she believed that due to VFX, the scripts and performances had been pushed into the background. While Claudia makes an interesting point here, editing of films are starting to pay attention to this. In Avengers Fate of Ultron, there is a scene where the character Vision is born and heads to attack Thor, but is stopped and realises he shouldn't do this. A deleted scene shows originally he was going to be involved in a long VFX fight with the Avengers. This was however removed as it didn't contribute anything to the storytelling. The problem of storytelling, however, occurred in the Avengers when some critics claimed the storytelling wasn't compelling and there wasn't much character development. In a way, this is true. Black Widow and Hawkeye, who are supposed to be main characters, had little character development, especially as Hawkeye was away from the team being mind-controlled for most of the movie. The film's huge moment was the Battle of New York, a scene mainly filmed on the green screen lot, and heavily relying on VFX.
Right. Army.
However, in an interview I conducted with VFX executive producer Terence Bergeron, he believes that VFX have actually improved movies. He believes it allows us to tell stories in a less expensive way than if we were to do them practically. While we would get genuine reactions from the actors with practical effects, bigger practical effects such as explosions become costly. The bigger they are, the more expensive they become. Especially in Avengers, huge explosions occur at times very close to the protagonists. If the director wants the audience to see the faces of the main stars, it would be very dangerous and risky to have actors so close to practical explosions. Marvel Studios' biggest hit film to date is The Avengers. It took over $1 billion in the box office and was a hit with critics. They then went on to produce hits such as Guardians of the Galaxy, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Doctor Strange. Along with The Avengers, these three films are a perfect example of films that rely on VFX. Doctor Strange takes you to alternate dimensions and introduces you to magic. Guardians takes you on a road trip through the galaxy, and Winter Soldier involves the takedown of an organisation.
Damn right.
Back in 1988, NBC released a TV movie based on the comic The Incredible Hulk. Since this film is from the 1980s, the effects weren't brilliant. In one scene, the Hulk and Thor have a confrontation after Hulk threatens Thor's return to his home. Back then, the technology was not advanced enough to have a huge CGI model of the Hulk to go on a rampage. So the effect here was very simple and done practically. During the transformation into the Hulk, Fregno was painted green and flexed his muscles to rip a shirt. Hulk looked very cheap and unrealistic compared to the comics. It was just a man painted green who had big muscles. Just over 20 years later, the Hulk and Thor are pitted against each other again, now played by Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth. We now have a full CGI model of the Hulk that makes the audience believe he is truly a superhuman monster. Since we can now also take real life actors such as Hemsworth and rotoscope around them, his character Thor can be thrown to the ground and smashed through walls. Rotoscoping is basically where you can take the actor out of the shot and add extra effects to them. It is later on in the film, however, that we see improvements to the Hulk have been productive to the actual storytelling. Across the film, Bruce Banner has a plot point centered around how he can stay calm and not turn into his raging alter ego. Later on in the film, the Avengers are battling the aliens T'Chari, and they require Banner's assistance.
And tell him to suit up. I'm bringing the party to you.
Banner then reveals his secret of how he stays calm.
Dr. Banner. Now might be a really good time for you to get angry.
That's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry.
He then proceeds to turn around and transform into the Hulk, saving them from the aliens. This VFX shot has conveyed a story plot point, making it an iconic and important scene in the film. Back in 1978, CBS also released a movie based on a Marvel comic. The film they released was Doctor Strange, based on the Doctor Strange comics. Due to the film being quite old and outdated in terms of visual effects technology, the effects weren't great. In the film, a character named Morgan speaks to her master, a disembodied head in another dimension. Here, you can see they've used a smoke effect to cover up the computer-generated face. When you compare it to the 2016 film, you can see how far we've come in VFX. We've come further than just creating a human face in film, we've now achieved the ability to create monsters too. In both versions of the film, Doctor Strange's friend, One, comes under threat. In the original film, he is surrounded by flames created by the villain. This is an effect that was done practically. The idea was to have One surrounded by a rubber ring, covered in flammable liquids which would then ignite. They had the actual actor do this, which was extremely risky. There were also other practical effects in the film, meaning that the shoot overran by several days, costing the studio more money. However, in the 2016 film, One is murdered during the battle against the film's main antagonist, Caecilius. This effect was done later in VFX, as doing VFX nowadays is a lot cheaper than hiring people to be on set and apply special makeup. In this scene, Strange encounters that the street has been destroyed and uses his magical abilities to rewind time and put the street back to normal. To achieve this effect, again, VFX was involved. Certain characters such as Stephen Strange and Kyle Mordo are still going forwards in time, whereas everything else is going back.
We've got a second chance!
While last year's Doctor Strange was met with praise, the old classic movie didn't receive the same. The movie's storytelling was considered slow and ahead of its time. This film is from the Silver Age of comic books, the time when there was a lot of competition from TV, so it was actually quite daring to actually have a comic book movie in the first place, as not many people at the time cared about Marvel or DC Comics. So with people believing that this movie was ahead of its time, perhaps it was because we simply didn't have the technology to bring such a visually complex comic to the screen. Terence Bergeron believes in the future virtual reality will actually begin to intermingle with films, even in a small way to promote the movies and bring additional content to DVDs and Blu-rays, whereas Claudia Somak believes that replacing actors with virtual characters created in CGI will be the next huge development. In this documentary, we set out to see how much of an impact visual effects has had on the movie industry, and in particular, comic book movies. A lot of aspects affect storytelling, and VFX is one of them areas. It started off just being a small hand on a screen in the film Future World, which back then was amazing and seemed to be an iconic piece of film history. Now we can create bigger worlds and experience spectacular visuals from films. Ethical problems are now emerging in even the post-production side of films, with actors now being brought back from the dead. However, with VFX we are starting to rely on them all the time, which could lead to storytelling being affected and pushed into the background. With VFX not seeming to go anywhere anytime soon, we will need to embrace it. It definitely has had an impact on the storytelling of films. There are definitely times where the storytelling and performances are pushed into the background, but there are times when they contribute hugely to the story in ways that practical effects could not achieve. Filmmakers just need to ensure that storytelling is not something that becomes second. It is the most important element of film, but also embrace VFX and the power it has to improve a film.